One of the things that got me into EHF was the idea that talent is borderless. I had to find as many holes and gaps through the system to get to the West, get the education, jump into tech, and work on the things that I worked on in the past. But the more people I connect with across Africa and the countries where I come from, is that there's an incredible number of talented people coming in, technology native, learning everything online, even way better than the infrastructure that I had access to. And people are discovering the crypto space, Web3 space on their own, and finding an outlet of expression, finding an outlet of coordination.
Welcome to The Regeneration Will Be Funded. My name is Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're exploring the intersections of regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. Created with Ma Earth, you can find all of our conversations and more at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Today's guest is my good friend and collaborator, Yosef Ayeli. Yosef was the co-founder and CEO of the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, often referred to as EHF, and now he's focused on the intersection between Web3 and Africa. Yosef and I started EHF several years ago, but we've never actually been on camera and talked about the experience, what we learned, and our other reflections. So that's what a lot of this conversation is about. And in the second half of the discussion, we go into what Yosef is focused on now around Web3 in Africa, what he's seen in the crypto and Web3 landscape, what's got him so excited here. What a pleasure to have this discussion with Yosef. I am very lucky to count him as one of my closest friends. We've had an incredible journey together. I hope you enjoy it. On to the conversation with Yosef Ayeli. Today we're here with Yosef Ayeli. Yosef is working at the intersection of Web3 and Africa. Thank you, Yo, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Yosef, you and I go way back, so this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about the journey and have this conversation.
Absolutely.
So why Web3 now? You have a choice of working on anything, really. What's making you motivated about this area?
Well, the Web3 space is, to me, one of the most transformative areas of technology that is not just a technological layer, it's changing how humans coordinate and economies coordinate. So we have an opportunity to rewrite a lot of the fundamentals of our economic paradigm. And while we're building this space, it's a multi-decade journey, still in research and development. One of the biggest questions the communities are asking is, what are the real world problems that this infrastructure can help solve? And how do we get billions of people using it on a day-to-day basis? And I have a strong conviction that Africa is a big part of that narrative and that journey.
Well, I can't wait to dive in more on Africa. And I also would love to take a step back and hear a bit about your incredible journey from the start. And if you can please share that, the story that is your life.
Awesome. So I was born in Ethiopia, East Africa, during a time of crazy crisis. I believe many people know the story of the famine that put Ethiopia on the map, and we had a communist revolution. So I'd say it was a time of depression. And I had a few outlets growing up. One was service, which is a path that gave me a sense of purpose. My parents were missionaries, so the concept of serving others or living a life in service was a big foundation of our lives. I collected stamps as a kid, and that became my outlet to understanding stamps.
Like mailing stamps.
Exactly. I would go around asking people, hey, do you have stamps? And it was a fun game. I carried it for many years. And I'm a little embarrassed. I still have those stamps that I collected as a kid. And that was my entry point into understanding the world. It was my gateway to imagination. I was drawing and painting, and that was my gateway to creativity. And later on, internet came, and that opened up the world to me because I was this little kid in Ethiopia. I was quite lucky to get scholarships to study in international schools. But the idea of global travel like we have right now was just far, far away from any part of my reality. So the internet opened up the world. You can learn, understand, read, even converse with people elsewhere. And I learned most of my English online. I was first taught English by Italians, which is the worst thing you can do. And so internet has been very transformative in my life. But we'll come to the Web3 part of where it comes for me. But the internet was also very gated for Africans. So if you get to a point of, hey, I've read and learned all of this, but I want to get to the next phase, oops, there's a payment page, you got to pay. And no credit cards, no bank cards, nothing that would work to transact with the rest of the world. So that was one part of my experience.
Effectively shut out of the e-commerce part of the internet.
Exactly. The economic engine of the internet.
Right.
Yeah. So anything that basically required payment. So I applied to American universities because I wanted to have the best education out there. And I couldn't even apply to college because I didn't have a means of paying the $75 for the application fee.
Right.
So I had to ask a friend of a friend of a friend who had a European credit card in order to submit my application to Harvard, which later gave me a scholarship to study there. So it's kind of, it's beautiful, it's transformative, but a big part of the world was and is still gated from the internet economy that we have.
Right.
So got a free ride to Harvard. Moved there, spent 4 years there, amazing, and met your younger brother, Brian, who had dropped out from Harvard, came back to recruit, and I met him. I was taken aback by just how much you two had accomplished in a short period of time. And
he is rather charming.
He's very charming. And I decided to come join you guys at Inflection in the Bay Area. And I guess kind of stepping back a little bit, even what made me decide to go to the US was this thesis that if you want to do great things in the world, from Ethiopia, the narrative that I grew up in is you got to leave. Right. If you want to do big things in the world, you got to leave. The best building was the airport that we had, and the best road was the road to the airport.
Wow.
So on the streets, people would sell all sorts of things. The three most common things people sold were chewing gum, cigarettes, and DV forms. DV form is a diversity visa form that the US government has. People would just photocopy it and sell it for $1, which is now just a couple of cents. And everyone
is it just like a lottery ticket?
It's a lottery, and 50,000 visas are issued a year.
Wow.
And all my family members have filled that form multiple times.
Right.
So that's kind of like the narrative. And if you want to do great things in the world, my thesis was go to the heart of action.
Before you get there, I mean, what shaped your experience that gave you the conditions and the gumption to find a way from village in Ethiopia undergoing famine, a lot of this hopelessness about getting out, or maybe not hopelessness, but to then land into free ride at Harvard and Silicon Valley, something distinguished your experience. And can you share more?
Yeah. The one thing I'd credit is my mother and just the incredible parents that I was gifted. They're the most critical things in our lives that are determinant of our life journey, we have zero choice over. And I just feel very blessed to be born in that family, who really inspired the spirit of imagination and the spirit of being able to see and think and wonder about the things that don't immediately exist in front of my eyes. And that really embedded that sense of imagination and to keep inquiry, to keep asking, to keep digging, to being curious. And when you nurture that in a kid's life, then you remove any form of ceiling, any form of limitation that we construct for ourselves. And I think I was extremely lucky to be born in this moment of pre-internet era and internet era.
Right.
I wouldn't be here without the internet. And I think access to information is transformative, right? And I have a strong belief that talent, ideas, curiosity, imagination, these are all things that exist everywhere. It's just the conditions we create that nurture those to then realize someone's full potential. So I was very much gifted with that type of experience. We had very little, so it wasn't monetary, but it was quality time with people who really cared about imagination.
Beautiful. Okay, so you graduate from Harvard, Inflection company that my brother and I started a long time ago. We were in a fast growth phase looking for the smartest people in the universities. Manages to get your attention. You move out to San Francisco. Then what?
Yeah, so moved out to San Francisco, and one of the drivers to move to San Francisco was technology is transforming the world. I had tasted that before, and I had seen it in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, and Kenya, where I also lived. And let me go to the heart of action, where that is being created. We were focused on growing the company and hiring top talent from all over the US to help meet the needs of Inflection. It was an incredible boot camp to learning about different parts of what makes a technology company functional. These things that I could learn theoretically in school, and then you see the practice of it is just such a huge gap, right? And during my time at Inflection, I received a letter from the U.S. government saying that I did not qualify for the H-1B visa, and therefore I am not allowed to keep living there. And so it was quite a rough moment, because I had kind of held on to this truth that, hey, this is a place I'm embedding myself. I'm doing great, working with people I love on things that are exciting. And that completely shook my grounds. Basically opening up a letter and the same day being the last day of work. Credit to you and the whole Inflection team. We tried so hard to kind of push the system.
I mean, at this point, you had risen within the company into leadership ranks, running the recruiting, the college recruiting. Everyone loved you. And I mean, it was like a devastating moment for the entire team. I remember everyone in the lunchroom, we were effectively having a mass grieving. They're like, Yosef's getting kicked out of the United States because his degree doesn't match the job title for the immigration, and he's on a country list that is not, like, what is happening right now?
It's a very archaic system, and it was very painful. It made me feel like I had done something wrong.
Right.
But then when I zoom out, it was the same time when the seed steading initiatives were happening, people trying to build whole cities on a ship a few hundred kilometers away from California.
Right, these like temporary autonomous zones in the middle of the ocean, seasteading.
Because it's not working. This system was not working for anyone, right? It was a time when so many tech CEOs were lobbying the U.S. government to change this part. It just did not make sense. So I had a $250,000 scholarship. I did not pay a single cent. I had my flight to the U.S. covered by Ethiopian Airlines, and just when I started contributing to the economy, so to me, it was kind of a realization that actually the system is broken because it's working against itself. I had incredible privilege and access through my Harvard connections to Inflection. We wrote letters to senators and a lot of different people of power. Everyone agreed, like, this shouldn't be happening. Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter which category you're in. This is very logical.
Right.
But no
and I
one
think
is
that's
able to do anything.
it's a key insight that the people inside the system can often agree that something's wrong, and yet the system still can't seem to work itself out and change.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think to me, that's the downfall of so many of the institutions that we've built, where we are enslaved to serve those institutions as opposed to the institutions actually serving humanity. And that's where, I decided maybe I should look elsewhere. I should stop fighting this. Right. And again, Brian sat me down, opened up Google Maps, and said, "Look at all this greenery in a place called New Zealand." And it just stole my heart in that moment. Imagining what is possible in a smaller, much more agile environment where there are still institutions that are similar to institutions that are in bigger places, but it's a much more smaller, more dynamic, more grounded society. I didn't think I was ready to go back to where I came from in Africa. I just didn't have something tangible to contribute or to give. And so took a one-way flight to New Zealand. And the thesis was, hey, you can make a bigger difference in the world from smaller places. The initial thesis was go to the heart of action, go where it's all happening. It's actually no, because those are just so big, so convoluted, so archaic in their ways, and they can continue to exist to keep existing, as opposed to actually creating something new. You can create new things in smaller places, was the thesis that made me move to New Zealand.
It's kind of like that Buckminster Fuller concept of the trim tab, where it's that tiny, lever engine gear part that shifts the tiny little piece that helps shape the direction of where the giant ship really ultimately goes.
Exactly.
And what are those trim tabs in our system, and can we apply that at a nation state level and think about countries that can actually help steer the course of where we collectively go by being more nimble and having a more cohesive and holistic approach to systemic change. I mean, I think that was the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed ideas that we had at the time, at least.
and still exists. And I think that's the beauty. Something I've really admired about you and Brian is you guys are able to see so many years ahead from where the majority of people are and have a frame of mind for how to see the world in that way. And that was, I think, one notion that I found just a lot easier to hold on to as I was grieving myself of just having my ground shaken in the US. And now looking back, I'm extremely thankful that happened in my case, but I wish I had the choice. And I wish place that gave me so much had the ability to retain the people that it trained for free, so that they can actually contribute back and give back to the ecosystem.
And rather than being shattered by that experience, giving up, going into a spiral, whatever, I mean, you are such a resilient human being, and you just pick yourself back up and have a smile on your face. And like, what is that secret sauce? Because, you said your mother and your family, but also like there's something that's driving you to just not only keep going, but also to keep going with this like optimism or with this joy. And I'm so curious if there's anything more that you can point to help people understand what that is.
I guess the way I was raised was, we lived in a smaller room than the room that we're in as three humans. Our rooms were divided with curtains, big public bathroom with 20, 30 people that you'd share. Um, and the narrative that I grew up in is like, hey, you were born into this world to be a solution for the problems that you see around you. So instead of everything wants to swallow you, but instead of being swallowed, is see yourself as being here for a reason to bring solutions. So this notion of being part of a solution as opposed to sitting down and sulking and feeling like a victim of this world is something that I feel very thrilled to be born into. And one of the notions that my dad also raised me with is this idea that when you see challenges and problems, just lean in. Many times as in human nature, the challenge is just to pull out, right? When something is hard to pull out, just keep leaning in. And many of us have heard the story of the two mice that fall in a jar of milk. One drowns, and the other one struggles so hard that turns the milk into butter and walks out. And my dad told me that story multiple times. Like, you're the second mouse. You gotta turn the challenge into walking ground and walk out. And so that's just the worldview that I grew up in, and that saved me from all the chaos around me. And that's how I still see the world, is when I see a problem, or else just because everything is hard, and building and doing anything takes so much energy. So why do it unless it is something really meaningful, close to your heart? I think that's how we make great things happen, right? Just going all in, and I'm an all in or out type of person.
Totally. Okay, so seeing yourself as a solution to the problems that you know are around you, and that you're born here for a reason. I think that's a wonderful frame. Okay, so you get ejected out of the United States by immigration, and you land in New Zealand. Now what? You don't know anyone here, right?
I mean, I don't know a single person here.
One-way ticket, brand new country, brown skin, New Zealand, go,
Yeah. Brian picked me up from the airport, dropped me here, and then left in a week. And landed in this beautiful community called Enspiral, started by Joshua Weil and a number of just amazing entrepreneurs and change makers from all over New Zealand, all over the world. And that became my entry point into understanding community in a different way, learning and connecting with the broader tech startup, social change, innovation ecosystem. I did a 1-year-long research on comparing the New Zealand startup ecosystem with how natural ecosystems set up and thrive. Being in nature is just hard to see the world without the lens of nature.
So you were comparing startup ecosystem to nature.
Exactly. Yeah. Because the narrative that we had in the Bay Area is build a company, make that as successful as possible, right? So it's build one thing to keep dominating, to keep growing. And when you start thinking about the world through an ecosystem lens, the measures you have are quite different. It's less population level or individual level measures. It's the health of the whole ecosystem. So you actually start saying, what are the things that matter most in such a design? Well, one is we need to have quite a diverse ecosystem. Monoculture wouldn't make an ecosystem thrive. Something grows, scales too big, and then it ultimately kills the ground and the space that it lives in, and then it dies itself. So it's the path to doom, building a natural ecosystem in that way. But diversity, building very diverse set of plants that play different roles and animals, that creates resilience and makes things healthy. The types of interdependence they have with each other, right? The relationships. So you start seeing, instead of just one at a piece, is what are the different forms of relationships that exist? And the third thing is the birth and death cycles that happens. Things gotta die. We gotta compost things, or else there's no space for new things to emerge,
Right.
or else there's no topsoil,
Right.
right?
It's like one of our mutual friends, the permaculture teacher, Gary Williams, likes to say, it's not all about regeneration, it's also about degeneration. And, nature is not just about birth and new life, it's about death. And
Yes.
we all love how often you refer to, a failed startup as compost.
Yeah.
And, just seeing these natural cycles so that they're nutrients to come back into the ecosystem so that other things can be born.
Exactly. And Inspiral was practicing that. I was so shocked when things don't work, they just have a ceremony to let it die and compost the whole project, the whole startup. And the people don't disappear. People stay there.
Right.
Some of the resources are rechanneled into something else. The lessons, that's the biggest compost. It goes back. And so they've built this incredible ecosystem of people building so many different types of things. Some things grow, some things die, but everything is recycled back. It's like, this is amazing. I never had the emotional strength to let something die. From every training that I've had, and seeing it happen was quite mind-blowing.
Totally.
And as we were like exploring a lot of these concepts and notions, I met an individual from the New Zealand immigration. Now, remember, I have a ton of immigration scars, so I get anxiety attacks. Well, not anymore, but back then I was getting anxiety attacks when I met someone from government or immigration. He came to me and asked me, "Hey, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Ethiopia." Like, no. What organization are you from? I felt I was being questioned. But then started having coffee and multiple conversations and starting to understand the world from his lens and the lens of the Immigration Institution of New Zealand. I started to realize that these people are, one, trying to maintain borders of a whole nation state, right? And everyone wants to be in New Zealand. So it's a very there's a defensive energy that comes in. Everyone wants something from them, and immigration is a very personal thing, right? And the second thing is they want to attract talent. New Zealand's economy was heavily dependent on agriculture and food, which were great, but population is declining, right? A lot of the farmers are old. The foresters are over 70. So where's the new economic activity going to come from? How can we keep New Zealanders here? A lot of New Zealanders go overseas. So they were trying to grapple with a lot of these ideas and notions. We started organizing New Frontiers Festival down the road. Do you want to share anything about New Frontiers?
Yeah, I mean, so at this point, essentially there's this notion that New Zealand can have an outsized role in driving systemic change on the planet. And we're all feeling a bit disillusioned with the systems and the scale and the enormity of the challenges of our time, and wondering, what can be done in New Zealand. And you start studying this existing, beautiful, diverse ecosystem called Inspiral. And we have an interview with Joshua Weil, one of the founders of Inspiral, to talk more about that, and comparing it and learning from nature's patterns and kind of thinking about this. And now all of a sudden you're cultivating this relationship with immigration and a leader at the immigration. And meanwhile, there's people that all just keep wanting to come visit New Zealand, and we're living on a farm and we're out here in the rural area. And so we start throwing events and just having, a bit of a jam and talking about some of these topics and ideas, and the community starts to coalesce around that. And those events in those early days were called New Frontiers.
And you did this amazing talk called Incubation Nation, helping frame a vision and a narrative for New Zealand of it being an incubator for global impact, for a place for change makers to create solutions and share with the rest of the world, create data points of what is possible. I remember you talking a lot about like we need to have data points that we can refer to so that we know what is possible, or else we're walking in the dark. And places like New Zealand offered that opportunity, that renaissance, to show really new pathways for the world that is embedded in nature, embedded in indigenous wisdom, but also leveraging new ideas, new technologies, new perspectives that are grounded in wisdom, not just chasing the next wave of growth for the sake of growth, but really trying to solve real world problems. And my role there was like bring in a lot of the people, and then they heard you talk about Incubation Nation, and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. That's an amazing vision. And fast forward, I think a year later, the head of immigration, Nigel Bickle, at that point came out. He was a leader who was really trying to leverage the institution that he was leading to create positive impact in New Zealand. It's very rare to come across leaders who are not just there to maintain the status quo or just to click in, click out, but to actually do something really meaningful. And it was such an incredible merging of energies and coalescing of different strengths for him to say, hey, do you guys have ideas for us? I'm going to meet the senior cabinet of the New Zealand government in 3 weeks' time. Give me some ideas to take to them of new products, new ideas that we can create within the immigration apparatus. And we asked him, hey, 3 weeks is too short. Give us a bit more time. We created the GIVS.nz, GIVS. He came up with the name Global Impact Visas, which is incredible. Ty, our collaborator, built a beautiful website, did roundtables with Rebecca Mills and a number of other collaborators across New Zealand, just collecting ideas of if we can build immigration system from the ground up, what could it look like? What are ideas that government can apply to help it attract talent, but also be a platform for positive change in the world?
Yeah, it was such an interesting moment where you have all these coalescing communities and folks and opportunities. None of us can see the whole elephant, and you were doing an amazing job of bringing the community together across so many diverse people and domains and specialties at these events. And yeah, they were just incredible, talented collaborators, including also Roaster Productions, documenting and videoing, and we were publishing it out and just building excitement and buzz. And
Alina writing beautiful stories.
Alina and Brian doing poetry. And I mean, it was just like a really creative moment where things coalesced. And Matthew leading a lot of, Haka and the insight that there was this opening within immigration to think about some creative pilots for immigration policy to attract talent that the country would benefit from and do things a bit differently because immigration policies are really broken, not just in New Zealand. And so, yeah, it was like we were pitching ourselves as kids who didn't really have experience in these kinds of domains, just personal experience, but saying, okay, we'll put some ideas together because we understand, what it was like to be in Silicon Valley and what it's like to be in New Zealand and what these ecosystems on the ground are feeling like for entrepreneurs and investors and change makers. But don't just do it to attract money. Don't just do it to bring in, based on balance sheets and bank accounts. Like, how do you embed purpose and impact into the root of these new policies and systems, all the way back to the name? Like, we are here for global impact, global impact visa. Like, let's make a world first visa that's actually oriented towards what is the good that we are serving, what is the common good, what is our contribution, because a lot of the greatest entrepreneurs making positive impact aren't necessarily the ones that are scoring the most points, on the financial scoreboard. So that was the concept that you really shaped and started to socialize and share with the immigration team.
Well, so many of us played different roles. And for me, this immigration part was something that really got under my skin.
Right.
So this was the chance
Totally.
to like rewrite that possibility, and
It was like your dharma. It was just like so
It was meant to
perfect.
be.
It was like, wow. Yeah.
but also timing is always important. And we were not the first people to approach immigration. There were so many people.
Right.
I think we just arrived in that conversation at just the peak of that moment to really move the needle in the right direction. And yes, we're young and everything, but also I think I'm so impressed by the government and the leadership at that point to see that for us to do something real here, we have to design it from the lens of the user, from the lens of the customer.
Yeah.
And I remember them talking to us while we shared all that we went through in our own personal immigration experiences, but also moving to New Zealand was not easy.
No.
Right. So it was very brave for a government entity to say, hey, what about this idea of designing a product from the lens of the end user? Like, this is something that people in tech, people in startups do, but government, which is the monopoly, wouldn't normally think that way. It's as if like you're building a website for the administrator, and then everyone else is just, someone who's just part of the equation. That would never run, right? You would never build a website for the person who's going to administer it. You build a website for the person who's going to come use it, right?
Right.
So I think that was quite a big step for them. And the other lens is New Zealand. New Zealand is small as a country, so if it's to do well, it wouldn't do masses of people coming in. So it would focus on quality, right? And so the question is, then who should we focus on? If we're not going to bring millions and millions of people like Germany and other countries in the world are doing, then where is our focus? So I think what we're talking about is not even just a moral argument. It had a very practical lens for them to say, hey, well, the base people are motivated by bigger things, and that makes them successful. And the bigger things is the impact that they want to create.
Right.
And I remember when we spoke to them, they have all these profiles of people that they would love to attract, but then showing them the stories and the status of those individuals when they were at the beginning journeys of their entrepreneurial life, they would never have qualified. So you want, as a government, you want the finished product at the end, but you don't have the ability to take risks earlier on in that person's journey. So I think that was another shift in sort of in their thinking. Say, well, we want that, but we want it earlier, so people stick here. So what are new ideas and new ways that we can innovate this part of the equation?
Right. So I want to get into the design of what emerged with Global Impact Visas and Edmund Hillary Fellowship, EHF. If you're listening to this and this part of the conversation is less interesting to you, you can fast forward to the Web3 part. But you and I have actually never sat down on camera and talked about EHF and Global Impact Visas, so let's do it. So yeah, what was the core concepts that ended up being cultivated here? And let's start talking about the structure of the program.
Awesome. So just even how it got to be from that conversation, 12 months until the government made that into policy.
Right.
Never seen before.
Right. Out of the signed off the Prime Minister's office.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it was
Prime Minister
like a new visa policy in basically a year being incubated, formulated, and signed off.
And then 6 months to launch. And ultimately, how we collectively designed it with government was them saying, we don't know how to pick talent. We don't know how to filter great potential here, but we know how to manage risk. So it was the ideal combination of hey, let's build it as a public-private partnership.
Right.
Let's have a private part that basically manages the potential, and we manage the risk. And the risks were border security, maintaining the integrity of the immigration system. New Zealand likes to have healthy people with few or no criminal backgrounds. Those are the things they're most concerned about.
Right.
Now, we built a new organization, called it the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, because we wanted to create something that is community oriented, has network effects built around it. And doing immigration alone is not fun.
Right.
Doing immigration with other people, it makes it a lot easier because there are a lot of shared experiences. You're figuring out the same things, schooling for children, or like how to build relationship with different communities, cultural differences, and all of that. Right. So I think the building it as a fellowship was a really high impact way of creating it. We applied a cohort model because it makes selection a lot easier, allows for people to build deeper relationships. Had 80% overseas fellows and then 20% New Zealanders, because bringing local ecosystem players to help embed our global fellows into the New Zealand community,
Right.
but also get global access.
Right.
So it's a win-win design. And that was what EHF, the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, came to be. We partnered with the Hillary Institute.
Right. So maybe just to take a step back. So basically the mandate from immigration was, we're reevaluating specifically entrepreneur and investor visa
Yes.
policies. You guys have access in that community and a bunch of creative ideas. Tell us what you think. We come back with a concept, global impact visa. It's obviously up to them how they want to do anything. We're just generating ideas. And they say, and you cultivate this idea of, well, let's create a public-private partnership to help administer this kind of visa, because going out and attracting and selecting all of that talent is not something that immigration as it currently stands was really set up to do.
Exactly.
But they still need to do risk management. They still need to do background checks and criminal checks and border checks and all of that. And that is very much still, and they get full final authority over who's coming in and everything else. And in that process, the question is like, well, how do you derive legitimacy in a community, especially as foreigners, for doing that kind of work? And so it has to be community led. It needs to be nonprofit. It needs to be partnered with existing institutions and groups. And so the Hillary Institute for International Leadership was an existing, longstanding, sought to be the Nobel Prize of New Zealand, selecting great talent and leaders from around the world to be recognized and for their work to be elevated. And they were just so happened going through a bit of a phase shift and were open to new ideas and structures. And so we decided to take all of this body of work and incubate it within this existing nonprofit apparatus with existing governance. And the Hillary Institute was launched by Sir Ed and Helen Clark as the patron, so it had the kind of community governance and legitimacy required for this kind of bold experiment. And it was carved out as an experiment, which I think also gave everyone just enough permission to say yes. I mean, it wasn't super popular. It was like people kind of holding their breath, right?
Yeah. Well put in terms of helping explain that part. But it was really radically new for many people. It took them by surprise. The fact that government would build such a partnership, never been done or seen before here. And for right reasons. I think people are really protective of the integrity of the New Zealand's immigration system, and we don't want it to be corrupted, right? So I think there was a lot of energy just waiting to see what will happen with this. But we just kept executing and focused on getting the right people for New Zealand. It was quite an interesting role to play because we're not for profit. Government gave us $4 million to get off the ground, 4 million New Zealand dollars to get off the ground. The starting thesis was that this thing will be self-sustaining. primarily funded by the private sector in New Zealand. And 4-year pilot. Here are 400 visa slots. We, government, will still have a say at the end on who is actually given a visa, and government processes the visas, manages that part. It's a 3-year work visa. The hardest part to agree on was also the fact that don't have minimum, maximum number of day requirements. We threw all the variables that aren't indicative of someone's ability to contribute out of the window, such as what school did you go to, how linear career path you've had before, where are you from, how old are you, all the things that are so subjective and just don't make any sense, and built quite a rigorous selection process that focused on really getting to the point of understanding someone's individual track record, what are the things that they've built, have they done the things that they say they will do, where do they see their future trajectory going to, how do they want to relate with New Zealand, the entrepreneurial set of experiences and skills. So we took a much more hands-on and very tailored, individualized approach of vetting. People were interviewed 2-3 times, 6 references, background search. That's before they even go to the immigration part, but designed it in a way that is not heavily cumbersome, which other visa processes are. Hiring lawyers, filling dozens and dozens of paperwork, paying thousands of fees to government or to legal or accounting services. So we were able to achieve sort of the risk management, but also the full potential of what this can offer New Zealand.
Right. So basically, at this point, you're chief executive of the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. You have a mandate. Here's 400 global visas that you can go out and basically use to attract people. And here's $4 million New Zealand to run this pilot for 4 years. And hopefully you can get to self-sustaining by the end of that, right? And presumably people will want to be affiliated with this and sponsor it and so forth. And so we'll figure out the revenue model as we go. And I remember Jason Green from Emergence gave us a really important insight about designing it as a cohort model and a fellowship model. And I think that wasn't part of the original ideas, but in hindsight was probably one of the most successful ingredients, because what it allowed us to do was to bring people in by cohort, by season. That created a shared experience for those folks, because if you think about the immigration journey, it's really scary. It's really lonely. It's like I'm landing in a new place. And the countries have this incredible opportunity to create an onboarding experience. Like you join a company, if a company is well run, it has like an onboarding program and plan. You join a country, there's no onboarding plan.
No.
Right? There's no one helping you figure out where you're going to locate, where you're going to find work, where you're going to find your collaborators, et cetera, let alone building deep connected relationships with other people who are on a similar journey. So that was one piece, but also, critically with the design of the visa, the current immigration policy settings, by and large, that we saw are far too short-term focused. Far too short-term focused. And you and I both having experience of going to another country, this stuff takes a long time. And if you have children and companies and existing root structure in your place of origin, you cannot be trying to take that and transform it into full-blown, contributing citizen of a new country in 12 months or 24 months. Like, it's an insane proposition. You really need to create the kinds of conditions where these things can take 5, 10, 15 years, building relationships with countries slowly, like let's date before we get married, And so how does that kind of structure really take form inside of policy settings was one of the challenges that we grappled a lot with.
100%. And the biggest risk also from a government lens in New Zealand is that it's a country of 5 million people. A lot of the young talent leaves. A a lot of the people who come here are for short-term work or to study, which contributes to the economy, but then some stay, a bunch leave. And the mass talent that New Zealand attracts are people retiring.
Right.
And so there's this risk of, will New Zealand be the retirement village for the wealthy people around the world?
Right.
And the answer they wanted is a no. We want to attract people earlier in their lives. And so this was one way for them and for all of us to help New Zealand get smart, talented people coming way before their retirement to actually build and create and contribute, and not just live here full time and make New Zealand the only thing that they do, but their globalness, their global citizenship is an asset because it provides doors and relationships and access, which is something that's hard to have from a place that's at the edge of the map, that is in some way integrated in the global economy, but also quite distant in many ways, culturally and physically. So this was kind of seen as a pathway to the world, as a way to have people earlier in their life journeys. And so we were giving them 3-year work visas. But at the end, if they're engaged, if they're contributing, they can have access to be permanent residents. And that was an incredible gift from New Zealand to fellows to say, hey, you can have this pathway to be here forever. Permanent residents don't expire. You can vote. You have education, healthcare. So we were in some ways recruiting future Kiwis who will build a long-term base here. But yes, it's a long-term cycle, right? And one of the things that is harder to understand if you're not living and breathing the experience of being a founder or builder is that, your life goes in 7-10 year cycles, right? And at some point, transitions happen. And at some point, people figure out, what's next for me? What do I build? Where do I base myself? What are the new ways I can leverage my experiences to do good in the world, right? And those things, you can't engineer that to happen today, right? But if someone is really interested, maybe the way they engage in the first 3, 5, 6 years might be different from how they'll engage in the following 10, 20 years, right? And we needed to have that side of view in order to pick the types of people who can contribute to New Zealand over a long period of time.
And another important, I think, design concept that was pretty radically different than existing immigration approaches was really drawing from our experience in Silicon Valley and the startup ecosystem and taking a venture-like approach and saying, we're not going to pick people just on the basis of university degrees and salaries and bank accounts and so forth and try to de-risk all of those criteria around talent. We're going to create a subjective, community-led attraction and selection process that was fairly decentralized. There were a lot of people giving input on applications and scoring and random sampling and doubles and triple interviews and so forth. And we're going to try to pick people that we think are a really good fit that have tremendous potential for New Zealand. But a lot of them, the projects, the ventures aren't going to work out, right? Like that's okay, because if a few of them create huge amounts of value, they become the forest giants, the kauri trees in the forests, then we've done our job well, because that's how the math of value creation tends to work. But when you do that, but then you're still applying a human lens, it's like, well, those other shrub species of trees and projects that emerged and the compost and the nutrient cycling of it are all equally important, right? So it's not to say that there's any person that's more important than any other person, but it is to say that the value creation here is going to look 80-20, 464, disproportional, and so forth. And if you take more of a venture style lens to this kind of entrepreneur and investor attraction process of immigration, you might get outsized results.
Exactly. And that's something that's harder for a government entity to do.
I still don't know that they really got it.
I don't think they do. And these are things, and when I was working with EHF, is that a huge part of our impact, I will not be around to see it.
Right.
And not even be around, but we won't even be able to point a finger to and be able to measure it.
Invisible rebels.
Right. So it is, because we've got multiple stakeholders. There's the New Zealand government, there's the New Zealand ecosystem, there is the Hillary Institute, and we haven't talked about, but it's critical, is iwi, the Maori tribal organizations that exist.
And let's go there. Because that was another thing that really emerged in the discovery journey, and it ended up really shaping the program as well.
Yeah, I guess the zooming out, deepening our personal relationship with the Maori worldview, Maori communities, was for me personally very transformative, and it really critical to deepen relationship, to really understand and walk the walk of just the existing relationship between newcomers and people who are here for a long period of time, which is the Maori, the indigenous communities, but also working with immigration and asking, how do we not repeat colonization the way it happened before?
Right. Immigration was colonization.
Exactly.
People came to the shores. That was colonization for Maori people for such a long time of the experience.
But my experience of also connecting with the Maori tribes here, especially in the Wellington region, Tiatiawa, Taranaki, Whanui, the level of generosity towards newcomers was extraordinary, considering the history that has happened. Yes, there is a skeptical lens of, why are you here? What do you want to do? And how are you thinking about us?
Right.
And are you taking the time to learn our history and who we are, our role here, why we exist, and what we want to do? That is really important. But we want to welcome you with open arms. And that level of generosity is just incredible, and it's heartwarming, and it's opening. And it comes also with just the honesty of the reality. Right. And so you cannot have just flashy generosity without being real of what is. And I think what we try to do is get EHF on a path to partnering and embedding some of those values and opening the channel for our fellows as they land in New Zealand to experience that beautiful generosity.
Right.
And to experience the reality of the history and the reality of the dreams and the possibilities of the Maori communities here. And, as very young newcomers who are trying to flesh it out in the middle of multi-generational history, treaty negotiations and agreements that, have been breached and are trying to be resurrected in so many different forms, it was a really challenging space to walk through, and guided by our elders and people around us. But I think it was still a worthwhile path to walk on.
I mean, the number of people who've said to me that EHF has been a great experience. I'm really grateful for coming to New Zealand, but it was the experience with the indigenous people, the Maori, the people of this land, that was actually the most transformative part of the experience. It's almost countless. I've heard that over and over and over again. And, that back to that idea of what's the onboarding experience for a new immigrant into a country? And so this is what we call the welcome experience or the welcome week. And we created this retreat experience, which was somewhat inspired and informed by the Compost of New Frontiers. And for a while was in conjunction with New Frontiers. But really, it was an intimate gathering where the fellows of that cohort came together. And it was a requirement to be a fellow, to be a Global Impact Visa holder, that you had to come to a welcome experience. And that experience was anchored by Te Atiawa, Taranaki Whanui, our local iwi of this region. And, there were sessions on history, and there were sessions on culture and etiquette, and people were having really transformational experiences of connecting that back to their home place. Because unlike many places Indigenous culture here in New Zealand is much more visible, much more alive, much more intact, and still informs so much of this bicultural country that's founded on this treaty partnership. So yeah, it was a really sweet part in my mind of the experience, and something that, again, we didn't know at the outset that was, but it was like a seed of a new way to do immigration in relationship with the Indigenous people that I think is hopefully a seed that can blossom in other places as well.
100%. And one thing I remember our elder advisor, Pekaira, would say is, if you're coming, walk through the front door, right? Come through, we will welcome you, and we'll tell you who we are and why we're here and what we're about and what ground we're standing on. And so the welcome experience that EHF started became walking through the front door. Now, some people coming from different versions of reality around the world think like, oh, great, I've had some really nice experiences here, but it's the beginning of a journey. It's the introduction. It's a way how to see New Zealand and how to see the world. And I've had many other governments reach out and say, hey, how do we learn about this? And context will change, in different places. But I think in the New Zealand context, doing it in this way was really beautiful and nurturing. And the types of fellows that EHF has attracted has been incredible in terms of diversity and depth of experience and breadth as well. So over 4 years, it attracted 532 fellows, 400 international, 132 New Zealanders. One of the things that we intentionally incorporated was having people come with their life partners if they want to. Because, again, immigration community, they're not individual things. It's a family thing. In most relationships, it's the other partner who makes the decisions. So, right? It's critical to have them embedded, for them to form relationships, for them to be seen as who they are. And
we always got that feedback at those early welcome experiences that, wow, having my partner here, part of this program, is so nice.
Yeah.
And thank you, because that we are immigrating as a family.
Yeah.
And so having that shared experience is so crucial.
Yeah. And New Zealand as a country was getting another group of talent that wasn't available. Right. So the partners were so much more amazing in some cases than the fellows themselves because of what they're doing and the incredible areas that they're working in. But even in the first cohort of fellows, we had people working in so many different areas, from investing in women-led enterprises in Southeast Asia to the co-founder of Coinbase, Fred Ursum, who then created Paradigm, that we'll talk about later when we're in the Web3 space. And a whole lot of other individuals were right at the beginning of the open source movement with software. And Naval Ravikant came later on, Tim Ferriss, Kevin Rose, Asia, the US, a bit of Europe, some of Africa, 58 nationalities represented. It just became a black hole of talent.
Yeah,
it started attracting people, and people come and have incredible experiences, and they invite the best people that they know to be part of it. So about half of the fellows that were accepted, you look back, they were referred by other fellows, right? So the network effects were working in that sense.
Yeah, and I mean, so at this point, I mean, it was not clear to immigration or the folks that we were really in conversation with that we could actually go find talented people and attract them, right? Fast forward a couple of years later, I mean, the demand was insane. And part of this was the macro conditions and Donald Trump being elected and people wondering, am I really living in the right place and so forth. But really it was that network effect. It was, and this is the key insight as well for anyone thinking about designing these kinds of immigration programs, is once you have that nucleus of core talent, they are your mechanism for attracting the next outer perimeters. And people who wouldn't have had any other context or desire to say, I'd consider actually moving to New Zealand. All of a sudden now we're like, wait, all of you guys are going to New Zealand?
Yeah.
Actually, what's going on here? And I mean, we were pinching ourselves at some of the folks that were reaching out and applying, and some of the people that had to be turned down. I mean, the application, what was the success rate in those later cohorts?
About 8 to 9 applicants for every fellow that accepted.
And at this point, the application's pretty robust. And then we funded the actual entity with the application fees, because really the sponsorship program wasn't the right incentive alignment, but the people who really wanted to come to the country were willing to pay. And we were still charging less than what most visa application fees even cost. So because it was a lean, well-run team by yourself and the other collaborators with you, folks like Andre and so forth, we were able to do that in a more sustainable way. And I also want to just touch on this one point about people instead of projects, because that was something you really drilled home.
Yeah, so we decided to focus on selecting people, not selecting companies or projects, because we're recruiting for future New Zealanders, right? So people will be here for a long period of time. And if our primary relationship is with the person, then one is we're aligned with the individual, we're backing them, we're there for them. And second is projects come and go, but people stay. Right. So it's a much better anchor to focus on. And that just shifted how we navigate the conversations, how we filter, how we focus, because ultimately we're an engine of backing great talent. If we back talented, smart, driven, impact-driven humans from all walks of life, then we're maximizing the potential contribution for New Zealand, the quality of community and relationships that we can build with the fellowship, and the better outcomes that we can get. So that was a key part of our focus.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we would have applicants whose projects are like, not that exciting, but you're amazing. And I don't know if this will work. Like, who am I to tell? But I think you can create incredible value for New Zealand.
Yeah.
And that made it easier to filter out the remaining 8 people to get to the one fellow that came in.
Right. Okay, so we could talk about this all day, and I'm sensing like I have a lot of passion. It's been years since I've really been inside the organization and been deeply connected to it, and yet I do feel really proud of a lot of the work that was done here, and there were mistakes made along the way, and there were tough lessons learned as well. And so let's kind of also share those realities.
So many. I think the initial assumption that we can sustain this with private funding, that was the wrong foundation to start with, because there was misalignment, as you mentioned, of banks or institutions. And if we were too aligned with that, I think it would have been really challenging. So there was a point the organization almost collapsed. We ran out of money, which is challenging to navigate through. And government wasn't willing to come to the table and keep funding it, because I think they wanted to see the results that you want to see 10 years down the road in the first 2 years.
Yeah, most of the fellows hadn't even gotten into the country yet. And they're like, how many jobs have been created?
Yeah.
How much investment dollars? And it was like, it takes a moment.
Yeah. So that was one part. I think the second is around expectation setting. I think expectation setting with the government part, I thought we did, but then governments change, institutions change, people change, and I don't think we had built this to sustain all the dysfunction that would happen when people change within government systems.
Yeah, with all due respect to everyone inside of Immigration New Zealand and government, and we, I think, have been informed by experience that it's all well-intentioned, good people trying their best to work inside of a big, difficult system. That being said, it was very dysfunctional. Yeah. And that's just the reality of our experience with it. And, in hindsight, Nigel Bickle, who helped set up the program, he was so instrumental at holding it together because he had the vision and the leadership authority to say, let's give this a shot. And when his role shifted, the next generation of leadership comes in, they don't necessarily understand the context and history. They don't have the same relationships. Like if you want to do this as a public-private partnership, the private side of that partnership has to be really equipped to be maintaining an enormous web of relationships and with leadership as well as inside the organizations that it serves. But, I don't know how many people were in immigration at this point, but like EHF was like 5 people. It was like you were trying to sift through thousands of applications, run interviews. I mean, I remember being with you and you're inside the Prius, going to the airport, running interviews with different like high profile investors, kind of going, do we choose this person to this person to this person and so forth. And then at the same time, balancing the demands and needs for the administrative reporting, the accountability, the risk management, and so forth. In a very, it was too underfunded. $4 million was not nearly enough for the scale of what this really, involved.
I think the EHF team recently announced that for every $1 the government put into this, there were $111 of economic value derived for the country, and that's from a research that they did alongside government bodies. So it's already paid off 111x of what they put in.
And a lot of fellows still haven't even arrived. They arrived next week in the last cohort, right? Because there was then this 2-year delay with COVID, where the borders were shut down and people couldn't even get in who were already selected.
But I think that's the challenge of, the government cycles that we have. And also, sometimes I was fighting these energies that, ultimately, what we were doing is for the long-term success of New Zealand. So it was so weird to feel like I was the one looking out for the long-term interest of the country, and balancing that from the short-term interest of the institution.
Right.
So ultimately, we're aligned in the long-term interest of the country, but in terms of today, some decisions that we're being pushed to make would have sacrificed the long-term value that would be there, after my role or after someone else's role. But that's the kind of integrity of what we set it up to do. So that tension keeps existing. The other tension point that I think we felt was because of the depth of experience people had in their welcome weeks and experiences, the idea of the fellowship started becoming very strong. People started getting attached to each other and to the notion of the community that was being built, right? And then there's the Immigration Foundation. So it was a fellowship built on an immigration program, right? But then the tension between, are we trying to make the fellowship the best fellowship, or are we trying to make the immigration the best? They overlapped, but there are certain levers that pull it in opposite direction.
Right.
So from a New Zealand immigration perspective, the incentive is, if this engine is working, we want to have more amazing people who are contributing to New Zealand, right? If you want to just focus on the fellowship, then actually we'd stop selecting new people and focus on, the existing 50, 100, 200 people that are in it. So that was one tension point that we saw building it in the way that it was built.
Yeah. Well, so like you said, there's 532 fellows. I know that when we hit those difficult existential junctures along the way, we decided, first and foremost, let's just protect that initial pilot group of fellows and do everything we can to make sure that they can have a pathway into residency in this country. And the Kiwi fellows, we didn't talk too much about. The New Zealand fellows, that was an important piece as well, because if you want to cultivate a startup ecosystem, the entrepreneurs who are already here, you want to give them access to all of this talent as well and these investor connections. And when they go overseas to go raise money from other outside players or for expanding their businesses or whatever, then having fellows overseas that can actually support. And that was a whole other layer, which is also fellows can be really valuable that don't even live in New Zealand because they, when a New Zealand entrepreneur goes to San Francisco and now has a Rolodex of people who are in relationship to the country and feel a kindredness to helping and supporting this ecosystem, that unlocks tremendous value. There were so many lessons learned. And I think one of my biggest heartbreaks is not that the pilot ended and that for whatever reason, government didn't decide to continue, but rather that this kind of model you and I always saw that the opportunity and the potential was to expand it out into other roles. Because the reality was we started to get applications from amazing academics and teachers and, different types of professionals. And the only reason we started with entrepreneurs and investors was because that's what we were asked for our advice on, and what immigration was reevaluating policies on. But the reality is, like, talent doesn't only look like entrepreneurs and investors. And so, I think that this kind of cohort model with more subjective criteria, with a community-led public-private partnership, with onboarding experiences deeply embedded within indigenous practices and welcoming experiences, and then creating an engine and a network effect of talent, I think that has legs. And, I know that you have governments reaching out and asking you for advice on this. And I would encourage anyone listening to this who's designing immigration programs to learn from the lessons of what EHF and Global Impact Visa did. You can go to ehf.org and see all of the fellows, which is also another unique innovation. Full transparency into all of the fellows, like what visa programs can you go check out, all the people who got the visa, right? But you can go see the profiles and bios. And I think as this thing plays out in the test of time, I'm obviously very biased, people will kind of get a sense of, wow, there's some real innovation here, and some core concepts that can be applied in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing that keeps coming up, and as I talk to and see other types of experiments that are happening, is that there's a subjective lens of evaluating great talent. And I think we're driven by objectivity to make things fair and equal, which I also agree with, but there's that tension point, right? And so the form of objectivity that other governments put towards subjective matters tend to miss the whole point of why it exists.
Right.
So, for example, some countries are using reference letters or letters of support from known figures. Then that becomes a popularity contest, right? So you miss the whole point. Like, yeah, there's a level of subjectivity, but you can create an objective lens. So kind of creating this middle ground types of experiments, in my view, tend to ultimately lead to what we're trying to disrupt in the first place.
Right.
So I think creating mechanisms where you really lean in on, hey, I'm here trying to pick winners, and I'm making a whole lot of bets on great people, and I'm going to make a bunch of mistakes, but that's part of the process.
Right.
And we're just going to pick great talent and give them room to play and give them enough time to play. And a small number of them will create this disproportionate value, and a bunch of them will contribute back to the ecosystem in other ways. No one can tell 100% who's going to do exactly what, but you diversify your risk and take that approach, and work with people who have actually gone through the process, who understand the journey of being a migrant, and who can relate to the people who are actually on the other side of the table. I think that approach, to me, is something that any government anywhere in the world can kind of take and apply without putting too many layers of control around it.
Yeah, well said. And so you've transitioned your role to Rosalie Nelson, for a while back, and she's now tasked with the next chapter of Hillary Institute and Edmund Hillary Fellowship, and she's a great communicator, and we're hoping that this project and this organization will continue, with a bright future ahead. I want to, get into your next chapter, but before that, are there any final messages or anything else you want to share about EHF? And from my side, I just want to also say, there's a lot of names and people we did not acknowledge, and you know who you are, and it's impossible in real time here to kind of go through the history and repeat every name and so forth. But it was a community effort. It was a really unique moment in time. And there was a lot of really great hard work and mahi that was put into it.
I think EHF was a whole set of experiments of doing migration in a different way, an experiment of building fellowship and community in a physically embedded way. There's so many fellowships around the world, but very few are actually physically based and embedded in one specific location. The types of impact and work and the diversity of fellows is you know, people pushing a ton of edges. We've got people who are, you know, anarchists and who are trying to change the system from completely the outside, and there are people who have built incredible engines of success within the apparatus that we operate in. And I think there's just so many different experiments to pick from this. But the one thing I keep coming back to, it is really like focusing on the people and focusing on really what they're building and how they're moving towards. And I think those are the things that will make this project work a long time. It's easy to kind of programmatically design things to kind of get people to fit into things. But you know, these are drivers, these are builders, these are doers, right? So I think that will really help shape where this thing will be in the future. And I really hope that other communities around the world and other places take lessons from this and change about talent migration in a different way.
All right, Joseph, let's talk Web3. Like Africa, Web3, what's going on here? What are you seeing, sensing? Tell me about this.
So let me tell you a little bit about the transition from EHF to Web3 space in Africa. One of the things that got me into EHF was the idea that talent is borderless. I had to find as many holes and gaps through the system to get to the West, get the education, jump into tech, and work on the things that I worked on in the past. But the more people I connect with across Africa and the countries where I come from, is that there's an incredible number of talented people coming in, technology native, learning everything online, even way better than the infrastructure that I had access to. And people are discovering the crypto space, Web3 space on their own, and finding an outlet of expression, finding an outlet of coordination. And as I was doing EHF and figuring out my next steps, it became clear to me that I could go on a path of trying to get countries to change the immigration systems one at a time. It will take multiple lifetimes to do something like that. And on the other side, there's this revolution that is happening that is changing how we coordinate ourselves across borders. This whole new industry that's developing that is not necessarily founded and based in one physical location, that just completely changed how I see the world. And I started going down the rabbit hole, trying to understand more about what Web3 is and what is being built, within Ethereum and other communities. How are people applying this? And on the other side, I was having hundreds of calls with just mostly young people from Ethiopia, from Kenya, from Nigeria, and understanding what is their view of the world? What do they want to do in life? How are they learning what they're learning? What are the challenges and the gaps that they have? And I just became so amazed of, one, just the caliber of talent, the growth that they're experiencing as just individuals from where they're at, and the small little things that they're learning. For example, some people learning how to code on YouTube on a mobile phone, right? Imagine learning JavaScript on a mobile phone, and then having some small income that they can earn online, buying a laptop, and then now being plugged into highly sophisticated global economy from where they're at. So Web3 to me kind of offers a pathway for people to access a global borderless economy from where you are. And so now I'm not having to create a path to say, hey, follow the path that I followed, which is, a very small number of people can, to actually saying the global economy can come to you and you can participate in it, and you can use crypto rails to build the things that you want to build that meet a lot of your local needs. So that's kind of the why and what led me in that direction.
What is it about the Web3 technologies that are an evolution on the previous web and internet technologies that are are accelerating this type of access?
So there are few foundations and fundamentals to me that make a ton of sense. One is it's built on the open source movement, right? And the key word there is open. Infrastructures, development, applications that are open for everyone to see, open for everyone to participate in, and open for everyone to contribute to. But with that, there's no economic incentive that's been built that rewards people that are contributing to open source projects and initiatives.
Right. Open source is notoriously difficult to fund because the business model, what is it?
Doesn't exist, right? Or
it's just going to give your code to all of your competitors.
Right. But I think what the Web3 revolution is enabling is a way for you to actually have economic stake, economic movement incentive within it, which is actually very transformative.
Right.
The other principle...
And sorry to interrupt, but the reason it's transformative is because if we all do open source, then we're all building Legos that the other people can build from, and that things are not repeating the same steps over and over, and we're all contributing to the evolution of the system.
100%. And I think that just unlocks so much more of the human potential. And I think that's where decentralization in its fullest forms, in the different forms of expression, can really galvanize so much of society to do things that we would never be able to do in the highly centralized, organized fashions that we're used to building things in the past.
Right. And it seems to me that part of that is that permissionlessness, where rather than having gatekeepers in centralized institutions dictating and controlling the innovation cycle and the creation cycle and the participation, that what we actually are seeing are open source protocols that can be used, forked, remixed, etc., which enables that access to people who may have otherwise never been able to participate.
And I think the notion of permissionlessness is one of the most critical foundations that makes this space not just accessible or valuable, that helps places like Africa come and participate and help shape, and is kind of like switching parts of the world economy that were dormant. I feel like Africa is dormant in the global economy right now. And I think we can really unleash so much of potential that didn't exist before, and help participate in it. From the individual teenagers to early 20s people that I mentioned to you that can now participate without asking anyone permission. People can build on-chain credentials, reputation, profiles there, and build track record and add real value, and you can have an economy that works where it's much more permissionless and it's much more meritocratic than what we've had before. So I think that's a game changer in my view. And the fact that it's distributed, it's cultureless. I mean, there are cultures that influence the space so far because there are centers of gravity around the world, but inherently, at a fundamental level, it's not built on any specific culture. So we can all participate and build our own culture on it, right? So, and I think that's critical, because I think that makes it even more open.
Right. Another thing I think about is when we were coming to New Zealand together and sensing that, like, this country has so much going for it, and a history of being able to pioneer progressive policies, whether it was first country in the world for women's voting, or very early on different things like gay marriage and equal rights, and non-nuclear proliferation and non-nuclear policies. And it's kind of set a tone for many generations of being kind of a world leader in some of these kinds of frameworks. And I think you and I were attracted to this notion that, like, can it be an incubator and can it lead innovation given its small population and its tight-knit, cohesive relationships across society, well-educated, etc. And I think one of my observations that's been counter to that thesis, not that those things aren't still true and potential, is that if you're not forced to change, if there's not like a really deep problem, you don't necessarily take the kinds of risks required to innovate and leap forward.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, when do we actually make the kinds of changes in our lives? You know, it's like when the doctor gives us the bad news and we really have to do something,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, or when there's just a deep determination and motivation for a better way, because there isn't currently access into the global economic system. And so, in my mind, what you're describing with Africa in Web3, it is an interesting leapfrog opportunity to embrace this new tool set, and maybe jump ahead of countries that are going to be much more slow moving on this.
Yeah. Last year at DEF CON, I gave a talk to the Ethereum community, basically saying, we've had all these narratives of what we're building here is going to do a lot of good in the world and going to bank the unbanked and all of that. And so let's take what we've built to emerging markets and all of that. But in actual fact, it's the other way around. If we're here talking about creating global transformation, building tools that 1 billion people will use, and having real world applications, that's not going to be in the Western world. That's not going to come from places that have, semi-functioning institutions. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but if you're thinking about mass market, mass adoption, when you have things that are generally working, what you're offering is a plan B or a plan C. Go to places where either institutions don't exist, or they're weak, or they're not as predictable and high trust. Right. That is where what you're building can have a ton of value. And what you're building, not just the specific applications, but the underlying infrastructure.
Right.
Because I'm a big believer that people will build the things that make sense for their local communities and local places. And just to give you like a sense of Africa, because so many people talk about Africa, there's a lot of media, a lot of narratives. Africa is a continent of 54 nations. There are about 1.4 billion people right now. But the interesting thing is that's expected to double to 2.8 billion people in the next 20-something years. So no other region of the world is going to increase at that pace. And if we keep that up, by the end of the century, we're going to be 4.5 billion people.
Wow.
So 40% of the whole world population is going to be living in Africa at the end of this century. And not just population-wise, the median age right now is 19. The median age in New Zealand is about 38.
Wow.
In the US is around similar number. So the rest of the world is aging. China is aging. India is slowing down its population growth. Huge amount of the young people in the world are going to be in Africa.
Right.
Economically, it is also growing and rising up. So it's not just a bunch of poor kids to feed. It's people, 300 million people in middle class right now. By the end of 2030, we're expected to have $6.7 trillion of both household and business spending. Some of the hotspots of technology adoption that we're seeing in Nigeria, in Africa, including Nigeria, Kenya, people are spending money online and all of that. But the gap is that the internet world that is transforming many people's lives continues to be gated. So you cannot set up a PayPal account in Ethiopia to earn income from the rest of the world.
You can't set up a PayPal account for Ethiopia.
No.
Wow.
You technically can, but you can't earn income into it. So,
what's the point?
So what's the point, right? So people are saying, hey, I will use crypto, stable coins to earn money, right? Many African countries today are having a massive foreign currency crunch, part driven by the interest rates in the West, but part also the economy is growing. A lot of our debt is denominated in US dollars. Neighboring countries, Kenya and Ethiopia, or various other countries, they're trading denominated in US dollars. Right. So if I'm sending money to you across borders, it's going all the way to the US, somewhere in Europe, and then coming back for me to do direct business next to you. And so this huge amount of dollar shortage. If you go to almost all countries, and look at what are the biggest problems governments are having, number one, number two, number three is related to shortage in foreign currency.
Right. And the payment, extra fees and transaction fees and delays and being discriminated and excluded from the global banking system. And, the tools aren't even built for these different, geographies and languages. And
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like obvious that it's inevitable that now that we have this permissionless, decentralized, new rails and new forms of money and currencies and new possibility sets, that we're going to see massive adoption in a continent where there's booming population and a lot of young people who do have tech savvy skills.
Yeah. And within the crypto world, we have this sort of anti-establishment energy. And I come from a slightly different lens around it, which is, hey, we have some of these public institutions that are there to serve purposes for the collective good.
Right.
Yeah, they're corruptible. Yeah, they're inefficient. But the gap that we have now is that we have an expectation on these institutions to meet so many needs that they're just set up to fail. So my belief is that I think it's important to have certain types of institutions, but the demands that we have on them as a society is just not, it's just not possible for them to be able to meet.
Yeah,
So-
you can be skeptical of government's ability to address the problems of our time and not be anti-government.
Exactly. And I think what we see in many African countries is that our governments are not able to meet the needs of the fast growing populations. And not just the needs of today, it is when you have populations of young people, median 19,
Right.
growing up, especially if you're in cities, 40% of Africa lives in cities now, and that's changing. You're growing up with a lot of access to technology. You're growing up with access to information. You're learning a lot of things that your schools cannot give you, right? And so you want a piece of this world like everyone else has. Now, the best that some governments can do is say, great, we're going to build some manufacturing facilities to create X number of jobs and whatever. Still a tiny drop in the ocean, and it's not going to fulfill the creative potential and drive of a lot of individuals, right? So I think the digital economy makes a ton of sense, not for everyone to be working in, for a decent chunk of a population to be working in, right? So that is going to be built by people. And a lot of the coordination of people is going to be built by local founders and builders, right? I was just in 4 African countries with Vitalik and a number of Ethereum builders. And I met so many founders who are trying to build stablecoin solutions because of the various currency challenges that we have. It's not to say we don't need central banks. We do need them, but they're not set up. Their hands are tied in ridiculous ways. The IMF has all types of requirements of them. Some countries have, previous colonizers have certain number of requirements on them. And some of the challenges that I think that we have are just too massive. So my biggest bet is on, again, great founders, great builders, creating new forms of financial infrastructures from the absolute basics to credit, escrow, savings, cross-border transactions. A lot of these infrastructures, some people are building them with Web2 rails. Those have still a ton of challenges. They're providing a ton of value, but they have a bunch of challenges. But I think Web3 rails enable so much more than what is possible.
So you're positioning your work now and directing it towards the kind of supporting the entrepreneurs, the builders, the creators inside of the local communities in kind of the broad mandate of Africa. And, how are we going to rebuild or build new forms of financial coordination and tooling to enable access into this global economy and to meet the needs of the population where it is, and expressing that through funding and traditional venture style support. Is that correct?
So yes, when I zoomed out and I did a couple of years of research to really understand what are the real needs at multiple different levels and what is the potential of Web3 in the African continent. And to me, this is a multi-decade space to play in and to work in. And it is one of the most transformative areas that can unlock so much human potential there. So I said, great, I'm going to put at least the next 10 years of my creative energy in that direction. The next phase is what is really ultimately needed and what are ways that someone like me can contribute and support what wants to happen there. And a few patterns that I saw is one, on the public good side. I think there's a lot of public goods that are happening, but that can be scaled at a massive rate in a way that can add a ton of value. One is focusing on education, education at different levels. So the talent development, the awareness building. I think a lot of people still around the world, but also in Africa, are coming to the crypto space primarily from a speculation, looking at charts, if you're a bit more sophisticated, but which coins to buy, which coins to sell, how can I make quick bucks on this, right? And I think that speaks to the gambler inside of all of us. It exists, you can't fight it, but I think that's the primary narrative through which people are coming in. And I think there are different narratives, because if we can build our core economic infrastructures on chain and build trust and have ways of coordinating within our countries, between our countries, I think that's a massive potential. And I think we need to help people understand the full value and the full potential on that side. So part of me is really focused on figuring out how can we do public goods funding in effective ways and in ways that is really nuanced with the context and with the needs of different regions and different countries. And there are a lot of global players in Africa right now. Some of them, the majority of them, are extracting. There are farming users, because Africa has size, right? And so you can have large number of users that you can show on a chart and inflate your token price. So just a lot of short-term players in this space that kind of frustrates me to see. There are some people who are doing long-term playing. Ethereum as a community has been missing in action. And that's why we took Vitalik and a group of people there and want to do more bridge building on that front. But I think we need to build stronger bridges and put resources towards public goods on the ground, because I think that provides the core layers on which so many things can be built. On the other side, the things that bring the Web3 vision to life and potential to life is people building real applications,
right?
Either at the application level or contributing at the protocol level, right? So that's an area that I see is most critical, most needed. I started the journey wanting to build things myself, and then I started meeting an incredible number of founders. And so I decided to shift my gear and say, I'm better off supporting leaders and backing them and helping them access global infrastructures, global resources, but also aligning towards better incentives long-term. Funding helps set incentives. And there's a lot of short-term money that goes in, is in a 5-year cycle, and you're basically taking a number of shortcuts that limits the potential of the ecosystem and limits the potential of the funder. So I'm taking a much longer-term lens around that. So I'm positioning myself to play within the funding mechanism, both at the public goods side and at the venture side. And how I see it, I'm always inspired by nature, is on one side, you're creating fertile soil, and on the other side, you're growing forests.
So what are the key challenges that you're faced with right now?
There's so many different challenges around it. One is the fact that the rest of the world building critical infrastructure doesn't fully understand Africa and is working with variables, and they're optimizing for variables that are different from what African builders and users are optimizing for,
Mhm.
right? So I think we got to help build that bridge. We talked about public goods funding. That's really needed on that front. I guess the other side is um, the way African projects are going to be built are going to look very, very different,
Mm.
right? And they're going to be solving different types of needs, different types of problems. So it is really taking a very nuanced, focused lens and having enough long-term approach, because many builders are paving the path that they're working on,
Mm.
right? And within that, so far, centralized players have had a clear run on the landscape there. The FTX collapse recently has woken people up. Some of the debacles that are happening within the crypto world, which I think is very healthy cleansing, is waking people up around some of the values of decentralization and why we need it and why it's critical. So I think that is awakening people to really see what the opportunities are.
Right.
And I think it is really getting more communities being built, getting more centers of gravity in Africa happening. So one of the things that I'm helping is having more ETH events happening in Africa,
Right.
so that African cities become part of the global circuit,
Right.
and more people, because Africans literally cannot go to global events.
To a lot of the crypto events, right?
That's the one of the biggest
immigration,
blockers.
visa, borders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, many meetings that I step into, immigration keeps coming up as an ongoing pattern.
Yeah. It's
So
going to be a lifelong dharma for you.
yeah, we're gonna have some of those events there.
Mm.
Some of the funding that's coming in is to really understand local context,
Mm.
and I think we gotta help local founders build rooted from local needs, as opposed to building from a space of what does the San Francisco-based VC want to see,
Mm.
which is a very interesting sort of trap to fall into.
Right, right. So I'm so excited for this part of your journey. I mean, it feels like similar to the early days of VHF, and I've seen you get so lit up and excited and just feeling like, oh, this is it. And like you're finding this next chapter of purpose and meaning and enlivenment. So yeah, it's just super humbling and fun to see already the progress you're making at creating bridges in this world. I do want to ask one last question about maybe more of a reflective question on the nature of our global inequality, and having now so many different perspectives encapsulated in your experience. In the climate space, I'm seeing kind of this encroachment in the race to electrify and replace all of our fossil fuel machines with electric machines. The rich countries are going to just mine and extract the very last bits, and even an explicit acknowledgement by some that, oh yeah, people in the global south are going to get electric scooters, but there's not going to be enough resources and materials to necessarily even out the kinds of quality of life and development from an industrial perspective, because of the constraints on the planet. And when I think about the financial system, it's kind of similar. Like, part of me is like, well, how do we make sure we don't go recreate the ails of capitalism in Africa and rebuild all these financial tools on Web3 rails? But then it's like, well, it's unfair of me to put any judgment and morality on a group of people who haven't even had access to a lot of the basics in the current financial system that I've been a part of. And so, yeah, I'm just curious, does this stir up any other reflections for you and how you think about this, and especially now that you're at kind of this interesting nexus?
Yeah, I think that the space is full of contradictions, right? And I think we just got to acknowledge it and name it. There's a contradiction of, hey, we want to grow more economies to get to a certain stage, but then ultimately some things are not working for others, right? And I guess where I keep landing to is this notion of self-determination. I believe in the idea that people should have as many options as possible and make the decisions that is right for them. People might make good decisions, bad decisions in my terms, in their terms, in whoever terms, but I think it's best for people to have those decisions and those options around that. So my goal is to help shift some power by it's not even like equality, fairness. Like we talk about those terms, that's important and critical, but I look at it from a different lens. I think the world is missing out on great, amazing, driven African talent, right? I think we're really missing out. Like non-entitled, hard worker, fast grower, fast learner, talent, and scale. That's can participate, and it's coming online. Potential is being unlocked. So I'm excited about that.
And that's why you titled your talk at DevCon in Bogota, Web3 needs Africa.
Yeah.
Not the other way around.
Yeah.
That Africa needs Web3, but Web3 needs Africa.
The space needs what's happening in Africa to reach 1 billion users, to not just 1 billion users of Ethereum projects that people have built elsewhere, is for us to build on these infrastructures the application that makes more sense for us, right? So yes, we do need Africa from that sense. And the other bit is, what really pains me is the status quo is just not working for many young Africans. And I keep referring to young Africans because most of the population is young, right? Coming from Ghana to New Zealand is so easy to see the contrast in age and just normal people that you see, right? It's very young, driven, hungry population. Hungry, not food hunger, but hungry like in terms of, I want to do things. I want to build things, right? And I think the status quo is really skewed against them. It's skewed against them from distribution of resources. You see many countries coming and taking large amounts of resources. Most of the cobalt that we use for our phones and all the gadgets in the world come from Africa. Very little of it goes to the people, right? Most of the gold in the world, most of the diamond, most of the resources, oil, greens, and food, it all comes from there. At least a huge part of it comes from there.
Right.
And the current economic paradigm is designed not to benefit a lot of the people. So it's not that doesn't exist. Like there's a lot of wealth that exists there. But what people are being born into is not going to help them, right? So there's a path of, sure, go to the UN, go to the IMF, go to these institutions, and I just lose all faith, trying to bring change in that direction. Or you can build new forms of coordination from scratch and leverage the human capital that is in your head, that is in our collective potential, and let's build the things that make sense. Africans did that with Web 2 over the last few decades. When we talk about, hey, let's help the unbanked. Well, you go to some countries, the payment systems, infrastructures that exist in places like Kenya is way more sophisticated what you have in the US or Europe, right? It was so hard for me to come to New Zealand and pay $4.50 at an event to use one card to pay and tap at a festival, and then give it back to them and pay $5 to get my money out. I'm like, I feel I'm being cheated right now, right? Doing that. But so some of the leapfrog has already happened, right? So you're not creating something from the ground up. So people are using the tools to work for them, right? But what Web3 unlocks is, it's not just building tools by a central company. Now we can create new forms of coordination amongst us. So even in the climate space, I'm hearing so many really interesting early stage projects that are trying to shift some of the global capital that is available for carbon credits or reforestation, rewilding towards places that matter most. In crypto, there's the whole regen movement, right? I've been to many regen, not as many as you have, events. And the majority of those projects are so detached from the real work is happening. The real work, a lot of the real work is happening in the communities in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and Nigeria, right? That's where masses of land exist. Large number of people are there. People are trying to plant billions and billions of trees, right? But somehow that doesn't qualify for carbon credits.
Right.
Right? Somehow that doesn't qualify for And to be fair, trust is one of the biggest challenges in gaps.
Right.
And I think that's one of the places where you can apply Web3 Rails
Yep.
is to build trust. So like I keep just seeing the potential that's just within reach, but has multiple cycles.
Yeah.
And I'm betting on the people who are building those.
Well, I can't wait to continue to build with you in all of these realms and to be on this new chapter together, both in our respective Web3 curiosities and roles. And it's such a pleasure to be on the journey with you in life and to have gone through all the adventures and experiences we have. Is there anything else that I didn't ask or that you want to share before we close this out?
Yes. So just on the last thing you said, I'm excited to be on this journey with you as well. The best way to be on this journey and the best way to understand this part of the world that is like the last frontier market where so much incredible stuff is happening is to come. Spend some time there. Vitalik just did it for a whole month. I think you can too. And I think other people who are curious about this continent, this place, and it's not one continent, it's one continent, but it's 54 countries. There are thousands of languages that exist there. It's so diverse in all possible ways. It's where humanity comes from. I say there's an African in all of us. So it's not another, it's not the other. It's also like connecting within is to come, spend time there. We'll have a number of global ETH events there, knock on wood. Our goal is to get DEF CON there sometime soon and start happening, bringing quite a few events there. So
all right.
Well, spend time, connect with builders, connect with the community.
Yeah, let's all lobby to get a DEF CON in Africa in the near future. Thank you so much, Yosef Ayeli. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Matthew.
All right. I hope you got something from that discussion with Yosef. You can learn more about the Edmund Hillary Fellowship at ehf.org, where you can also see the incredible work of the fellows. You might also be interested in checking out our conversations with Sung-Yi Lee from Gatherings, Aya Miyaguchi from Ethereum Foundation, and Joshua Weil from Inspiral. You can find all of those discussions and more at maearth.com. Please like, share, subscribe, join our community Discord. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.